The Battle of New Capricca is both paradoxically one of the most beloved and hated space battles in all of science fiction, with some of the most creative and cool tactics and strategies that have stuck around for years after the show stopped airing, while also having some of the most infuriating, mind-melting stupidity ever put to screen. The cutoff from amazing to garbage tends to happen right around here. However, I'm not going to be talking about that. Instead, this video is dedicated to breaking down the battle from start to finish, going over the events and strategies to explain everything in detail from start to finish, as well as looking into potential explanations for a lot of the less clear things that we see throughout the battle. Generic greetings, and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of science fiction in all its wondrous and asinine forms to you. I'm Sai, your host, and I hope you enjoy. Part 1 of this video, Setting the Field. The Battle of New Capricca, while one of many such battles throughout the colonial flight from the colonies, was a matter of life and death for all humanity, though what sets it apart is how long the lag was from its first events to ultimate conclusion. The world that would come to be known as New Capricca was first discovered during a Raptor scouting mission looking for water, hidden within a dense nebula that blocked or scrambled Dratus, preventing anyone outside from looking in, and vice versa. The groundwork, or I guess I should say inciting event for the Battle of New Capricca, was laid with the detonation of a nuclear warhead aboard the Cloud9 by Gina Inviere. I think that's how you pronounce it. You know what? Confidently incorrect, we're just rolling with it. She was a Cylon Model 6 that had been hiding amongst a radical group of pro-peace terrorists after slipping away into the general populace. Said nuclear weapon was provided to the terror cell by Gaius Baltar as a show of good faith at an earlier date because his negotiation strategy is just the worst, and was detonated by Gina to obliterate herself far enough away from a resurrection ship to truly die. The detonation of the warhead destroyed the Cloud9 alongside 3 other civilian vessels unlucky enough to be nearby, and released a radiological signal strong enough to pierce the local nebula and be picked up by a Cylon patrol some 1 year later. The opening events of the Battle of New Capricca was the arrival of the Cylon fleet, something that caught the colonials entirely by surprise, as while the local nebula shielded them from prying eyes, it also prevented any outwards early warning. The first sight of Cylon vessels came from the Dratus system aboard the Pegasus, ostensibly more powerful and able to reach further into the nebula's distortion than the Galactica could. Initially believed to be sensor ghosts or errors that have been experienced many times before due to the interference, Lieutenant Duala was the first to notice that something was truly wrong and draw attention to it. 2 firm but unknown sensor contacts appeared at the far extremes of Dratus range before disappearing as quickly as they'd come. Seconds later, we see hard contact with multiple squads of Cylon small craft and 1 probable contact with a Cylon base ship. Though this sensor signal flashes in and out several times and rapidly changes positions in the few seconds we see it, so this is unclear. Moments after contact is established, we see 6 Cylon base stars jump in system, well beyond the nebula boundary, and immediately threaten the fleet and colony below. At first glance, this seems a little backwards, detecting Cylons far off at the edge of the nebula before the Cylons actually jump in. But I think a better explanation is that what we first see is a scouting force, most likely a single base ship sent into and through the nebula with its strike craft deployed in a search pattern ahead of it. At this point, the Cylons don't really know what they'll find or run into, only that somebody detonated a nuke somewhere inside this nebula. So it makes sense that they'd use 1 ship and its small craft to scout through, potentially even leaving a daisy chain of raiders to send clear signals back through the interference. Once the Cylons break the edge of the nebula, however, and get clear signals and Dratus contact, they most likely transmit a status report and telemetry back, allowing a further 6 base stars held in reserve to jump in system almost directly in front of and almost on top of the colonial fleet. The lack of reaction time or distance is also one of the main reasons the colonials decide to jump away immediately, as the Cylons could be on them in seconds and they'd have no real defense. This sets the stage for the Cylon occupation of New Capricca, maintaining a blockade of the planet while doing their level best to turn things into an authoritarian police state, all in expectation of the imminent return of the Battlestars and Admiral Adama. This sets the force composition for each side as follows. For the colonials, they possess the Battlestars Galactica Galactica and Pegasus, alongside their complement of Vipers and Raptors refit with assault packages, though the plan initially only permits the Galactica, with the Viper wings bolstered by some of the Mark 7s weapons taken from the Pegasus. Arrayed against them is a seemingly insurmountable force of 6 confirmed base ships with fully loaded raider complements, and a probable 7th that had served as the initial scout. Though by Cylon incompetence or pure dumb luck, 2/3 of this force would be moved out-system beforehand, leaving only 2 base ships and an expanded raider complement guarding the world. The extra raiders being based on New Capricca herself rather than in the base stars in orbit. And that brings us to Part 2, the ground campaign. The occupation of New Capricca was a relatively long and sordid affair. While at first the Cylon presence was beneficial as they had come to offer aid in very heavy quotation marks, but this early phase did end up with the expansion and successful irrigation of vast areas of farmland and a stable, truly stable food supply for the first time. Whatever goodwill the Cylons may have built up from this rapidly dissipated as they turned things into a bit of an authoritarian hellhole, with the construction of a mass detention center, brutal crackdowns, and mass executions of any dissenters or anyone who took action against them. This only fueled the fires of a growing rebellion planned in secret. In combination with scout patrols by lone raptors hugging the very edge of the disruption or jumping in quickly at the edge of the system to try and pick up signals before jumping away, a tentative line of communication was established between the Resistance members on New Capricca and the Galactica. Using a mix of covert signals, transmissions piggybacked on hacked Cylon relays, and dead drops for communications within the colony itself, the insurgents were able to plan an eventual attack in concert with Admiral Adama's return. This was enabled by the widespread disloyalty within the Cylon's new government, if it could realistically be called that. In an attempt to curry some public favor, or at least general apathy, the Toasters stopped using Centurions for daily patrols in the hopes that it would stop public outrage, and instead started relying on a new police force made up of collaborators. Expectedly, however, while there were some bootlickers willing to follow orders, more than anything, this allowed an extremely porous network of informants and traitors to spring up inside Cylon ranks, and while they were never truly given responsibility or power, they were still close enough to responsibility and power that they could leak incredibly sensitive information to other Resistance members about Cylon enforcement actions, whether their hidden caches were safe, and what the Toasters were planning on doing before they actually did it. This stymied many of the actions that would have made the rebellion impossible. After some months, a plan solidified. When the Galactica returned, the Resistance would launch an open assault on all Cylon positions in and around New Capricca City, aiming to cripple their control and break into several secure facilities, ostensibly to retrieve the jump keys they needed to escape, as well as physically secure the ships themselves held in impound around the city. This widespread attack would draw Cylon attention and hopefully allow the Galactica to execute her half of the plan without a hitch. And with all the chips in place, the only thing left is to pull the trigger. Part 3. Adama's Return. While the uprising was commencing on the surface, the Galactica jumped in on the edge of the New Capricca system, hiding amongst the dense Dratus-obscuring gas and dust of the local nebula. Deployed from the Galactica, a wing of assault raptors and Viper escorts headed for the far side of the planet, hidden by interference and carrying a payload of Swallow-class drones. Instead of any offensive purpose, these drones were meant to mimic the energy and Dratus signature of the battlestars Pegasus and Galactica. At first, this seems highly suspect. Look at them. They're obviously not 2 battlestars. However, above and beyond even the Adama maneuver, I find this to be the most interesting part of the battle, mainly because big, bombastic maneuvers are quite common in sci-fi, even to its detriment, thank you. Lightspeed ramming, Star Wars, what a wonderful scene. But plausible, clever tactics to outplay an enemy are incredibly rare and something that should be celebrated, if not screamed from the rooftops for how cool it can be. Dratus in Battlestar Galactica, just like real-life radar, isn't perfect. Put enough stuff between it and something you want to see, and the only thing you'll see is the stuff in the way. And while it's possible to filter for a lot of clutter or interference, nothing's perfect. The denser areas of the local nebula are most likely entirely opaque, like heavy rain to a weather radar, so the Galactica jumping into one of those zones would be virtually indistinguishable from the background noise until it emerged from it. By launching the drones in a less opaque area, the drones would return return a much more clear signal on Cylon Dratus arrays, but one that's still highly scrambled from the nebula's interference. Something is there, Cylon Dratus just isn't entirely sure what. However, when coupled with the spoofed ship chatter and energy signals, to the toasters, this would look like a legitimate attack by the Pegasus and Galactica. And this ruse works wonders, drawing the two base ships in orbit of New Capricca away to the far end of the system and allowing the Galactica to initiate, arguably, her most famous feat of the series, the Adama maneuver. By jumping into the upper atmosphere of the world, the old girl would rapidly fall towards the battlefield, bypassing any chance for the Cylon forces planet side or any remaining orbital guards to respond and delivering reinforcing craft directly into the fight, all the while spooling her drive for another jump. Though I will say, as cool as this is, the Vipers launching this way would most likely be ripped apart as they crossed from the Battlestar's hull into the atmosphere. Hitting the pressure wave around the Galactica like that would be like smashing into concrete. But, you know, rule of cool, so who cares? The added air support allowed the, at this point, flagging Colonial Rebellion to regain momentum, breaking through Cylon outposts and barricades, making it to the launch keys and ships, and beginning their evacuation in earnest. Jumping back into orbit moments before hitting the ground, the Galactica would take stock of the situation while positioning herself to protect the fleeing Colonial ships. The two Cylon base ships that initially appeared on Dratus near the edge of the system, with their strike craft scattered around the nebula and surrounding space, had been utterly duped by the initial ruse. They had been occupied chasing shadows and the scattered wings of Red Squadron the entire time, and while the civilian ships were in the process of evacuating the planet. However, moments later, hope of a flawless plan fell apart, as two additional base ships appeared on Dratus, most likely jumping in, having been held in reserve for the event of an attack. As to why they weren't just in-system initially, it's most likely because the Cylon's superior jump technology lets them get away with this type of offensive deep strike. Jumping in directly on top of or near enemies has been something they've done consistently throughout the Second Cylon War, and whenever they get the opportunity, they do. And ultimately, while the base stars are, terrible in a straight-up fight against Colonial Battlestars, the tactic itself is pretty ingenious. If you can just appear on the flank of an enemy instantaneously without any forewarning, that's a pretty powerful ability. And while the initial two base ships moved in to engage the Galactica from the front, the reinforcing two took up positions on the old girl's flank to pin her in and overstretch her defenses. But, as much as I'd like to just plow through, we gotta suffer a bit of a diversion here. This is where a massive animation error occurs, or a really significant oversight, because the number of base ships shown versus discussed and stated is wrong. Dratus on the Galactica shows, as the actors' lines confirm, there are 4 base stars in system, all moving to attack the Galactica, 2 on each flank. However, what's shown on screen is only 3 base stars arranged in a triangle around the Galactica. When the Pegasus jumps in, its Dratus also shows 4 base stars, then the Pegasus obliterates one Cylon ship in its opening salvo, and the remaining Cylon vessels move to engage the Pegasus. Both ships at this point still show 4 full base stars. So I frankly don't really know what to make of this. There's a 4th unseen one off screen that's like not doing anything. It's just hanging out eating popcorn. One of the base ships gets destroyed, and yet somehow subtracting 1 from 4, there are still 4 ships left. So I guess if the 5th one jumped in, and yet when the Pegasus makes its final charge, we still only see 3 base stars total. No debris or anything from the first one destroyed. So option 1 is the team just made a mistake here, and there was a continuity error going on, or an animation error, or like some communication issue between the writers and animators. Or option 2, they just intentionally messed with the numbers, because Battlestar Galactica likes to get really up close in its space battles with very shaky cam footage, and having a 4th base star and / or its debris may have just looked like shit in test renders, so they decided to remove it. I will be working on the assumption that this was an error rather than anything intentional, because it just doesn't make sense, and I will be including a 4th base ship into the scene, but not a 5th. So, returning to our regularly scheduled programming. Now surrounded by the 4 base ships, the Galactica faced an insurmountable wall. The incoming missiles alone would likely be manageable for the old girl, even if she would take an absolute beating, but the addition of 2 full raider complements armed with nuclear warheads was enough to stretch the defense grid beyond its means. The Galactica would have met her end here, were it not for the Pegasus, captained by Adamas, jumping in system at the far end of the engagement. With its opening move, the Pegasus oriented directly towards the closest Cylon base ship and obliterated it with its opening volley. Several hits went wide, impacting the spars, before a salvo from the ship's main guns found the base star's core, functionally tearing it in half. The remaining 3 base ships, realizing that the Galactica was probably not much of a threat at this point, moved away, giving themselves room to maneuver in case of further incoming fire, before moving to surround the Pegasus instead. Upon repairing the drive, the Galactica recalls its Vipers and escapes the battle, jumping away. Once confirmed by the Pegasus, an evacuation order is given and the crew rush to waiting Raptors in the ship's portside flight pod, escaping to join the Galactica and the rest of the fleet as well. Before this, however, the Pegasus was set on a collision course while the guns were set to maintain an automatic pattern of flak and fire back where and if they could. The collision course was set for one of the farther off base stars. The reason for skipping over the far closer one from the first pair was likely due to the lack of distance, as at that closer range and at the orientation, it was unlikely the Pegasus would have been able to maneuver into it, so instead, the base star that was most directly in front of and least likely to dodge was selected. In the last moments of the ship, she dealt light damage to the first base star, damaging the lower main spar and blasting off part of the ship's upper armor as she flew by. Ultimately, slow to react, the target of the Battlestar's charge was unable to get out of the way, colliding directly with the Pegasus's alligator head. The impact utterly shattered the base ship, crumpling it inwards like so much tissue paper, and had the Pegasus been in better condition, most likely would have continued on through the corpse of the base star to drift off into wherever its final resting place would be. However, with all the damage taken during the charge and her armor critically breached, the Pegasus suffered a catastrophic chain of explosions. It's reasonable to assume that what we see is the main reactor or fuel storage detonating, as it originates at the base of the engine block and peels the main thrusters apart like flower petals before launching the engine assembly almost directly backwards. This is followed by several smaller explosions along the main spine of the ship that separates the flight pods from the hull. Most likely, this is the remaining ordnance cooking off in sequence as explosions ripple through the inside of the ship. The result, however, was the starboard flight pod being launched directly away from the ship towards the third base star. While the Pegasus was charging, this Cylon vessel had attempted to position itself on the flank to fully encircle the Pegasus like they had done to the Galactica. This decision would prove fatal, as the base ship collided with the severed flight pod and similarly crumpled into so much debris and scrap. All said and done, the final tally of the battle for the Colonials was the loss of the Pegasus, most likely light casualties in the Viper and Raptor flight groups, and several thousand civilians lost over the months of occupation and subsequent rebellion. The Cylons had lost 3 base stars, with a 4th moderately damaged and extremely depleted flight groups for all of them. As for what happened to the other 2 confirmed and 3rd probable base ship from the initial encounter, it's most likely that they were sent looking for the Galactica and Pegasus after their initial escape. 2 remained immediately present over the colony, 2 were waiting in ambush somewhere nearby, probably in the nebula, and 3 were sent to scour the surrounding systems for the remaining Colonials to try and preempt whatever attack they may have launched, and as such, those 3 were unable to respond in time to participate in the battle. The end result was ultimately a positive trade for the Colonials in raw numbers, but an indescribably colossal loss in capability and fighting potential. Coming out the other end, the Colonials were weaker and less safe than they'd been since almost the start of the Exodus. While for the Cylons, it was heavy losses to be sure, permanent ones due to the Resurrection ship being destroyed by this point, but losses that they could recover from in a material sense, as the colony and their shipbuilding infrastructure still remained intact. And that brings us to the end of the video. Ultimately, I really like the Battle of New Capricca, despite the pretty unanimously hated ending to it. It's got a mix of really interesting and clever tactics, bombastic and over-the-top action, and frankly, even the death of the Pegasus was still pretty cool in isolation. If I'm going down, I'm dragging as many of you with me to hell as I can. The subject of if or how the battle could have gone differently has been done to death, so I won't bother discussing it. The entire point of Battle Breakdown is to talk about the battle itself, not the politicking and writing or whatever. This isn't going to stop anyone from bitching in the comments, though, no matter how much I may try. You bring up Lee or the Pegasus or New Capricca, and they just go, "Ah, Lee, Pegasus, traitor, idiot, bah!" And then seconds later, they've typed an entire essay on how it sucked and how Lee should have been hung as a traitor. Can't even really blame them at this point, because, like, it's a Tourette's twitch for them. They're halfway through the involuntary hate comment before they've even realized they're writing it. Anyways, that functionally brings us to the end of the video. If you made it this far, you're clearly the target audience, or you just enjoyed the content, so why not leave a like, subscribe, comment down below, all that good stuff to help the channel out against the YouTube algorithm. Hell, if you enjoyed it, may as well leave some suggestions in the comments below for another battle breakdown video. Suggest whatever battles you think might be cool from various sci-fi settings. The entire reason that Battle Breakdown came back, like, at all is because people read channel members were bugging me about it, and you specifically, I'm calling you out. I expect to see that tier go up. You made the promise, I fulfilled it, so get on with it. But yeah, thank those guys, otherwise this probably would not have come back at all. And speaking of, if you want to support the channel, check out our channel memberships. It's mostly to support science and sanity than any real perks, but you also get the occasional goodie, like being able to vote on video topics, occasionally getting exclusive behind-the-scenes content, shower thoughts, and early access by a day or two to new videos. You may also torment me by endlessly suggesting video topics that will probably never get done because they are insane. To all the people already supporting the channel, a huge thanks to the coffee vendors, making sure that my war on sleep is ever successful. The amount of caffeine running through my veins has turned my blood to syrup. One day I shall never sleep again. To the food merchants, making sure that starvation is a never far away foe, thank you very much to all of you as well. I greatly appreciate your additional support. And to the arms dealers supplying all the tools and toys seen in this video to make the most accurate recreation possible, a huge thanks to you guys as well. It was great fun to mess around with all of these ships in orbit of some random planet. Huge thanks to you guys as well. And with that, I have nothing else really to say. That's the end of the video. Bye-bye!